So when I say the word mental health to you, what's the first thing that springs to mind, please?
It's just, issues, innit? People's issues and that. It's a lot. When you say mental health, it's a lot. It's a big subject. Yeah.
That's what we were asking. I'm just interested kind of what the first reaction is we get to the word mental health. I think a lot of people think kind of struggle and difficulty and that kind of thing.
Let's say about maybe like 10 years ago, if you said mental health, you probably think, oh, you're talking about someone crazy. Do you know what I mean? But nowadays, it's becoming more aware. People know what it is. So it's so much different types issues. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is becoming more aware in society, and people are more accepting of mental health these days as well, for sure.
Yeah, that's true. And it's good. It's good now. Everyone's more aware of it, and it's easier to embrace. So if someone's got issues around mental health, because you can have mental health and you won't even realize it till someone actually tells you you've got me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like there's so many people out there with mental health issues that necessarily don't really realize it even.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, even me sometimes I didn't know I had my own mental health problems until I sat down and I spoke to someone about it, and I said, yeah.
I was 40 until I realized I had ADHD, man. So, it's like, yeah. The other thing we're asking people as well, I find interesting, is the idea of men and vulnerability. Is it okay for men to be vulnerable? Like, is it okay for men to cry?
Yeah, absolutely. Real men cry. Real men cry. If you don't cry, then you ain't got no heart.
That's very true. Actually, that's a lovely comment. I like that one. You don't cry, you've got no heart.
Yeah. Because you've got to cry. If you don't cry, you need laugh, cry. You know what I mean? You need all these emotions in life. If you don't have them,
that's what makes us human beings.
I agree, mate. I agree. I think there's been this stigma in society for a long time that it's not okay for men to show weakness by crying or not being emotional. I think that's really changing now. The more we speak to people about this subject, I don't think we are one person today, Al, have we, said it's not okay for men to cry. So I think this is great, interviewing people and finding this out,
Yeah, absolutely. If men didn't cry, we'd be living in a heartless society, I think. The heartless society, because we're meant to be the alpha. You know what I mean? We're meant to be the people that's not meant to be crying, not meant to show these emotions.
Doing this with your shoulders. Men meant to be strong man. Yeah, I know what you mean.
You know what I mean?
But there is that pressure, isn't there? We're meant to be like strong and,
That's true. But like, we all have emotions. We all go down certain paths in life. You know what I mean? That's going to bring you down and get you back up.
I think it's a place of strength to be for a man to show emotion. To be vulnerable is a strength. What do you think about that?
It's like, all right, for a person to be vulnerable, for a man to be vulnerable, it's like he would only show it to certain people. Do you know what I mean? I think with men is a bit more different to women. With men, they need more trust than women. With women, it's easier for them to be open up and cry about their issues. You know what I mean? Because it's more accepting in society. But when a man cries, you'll be like, oh, what's wrong with this fella?
Do you think there's more of a worry amongst men about, like, if they open up, they might be rejected by someone they're talking to? Maybe more than women do. Maybe that's why it's a bit easier for women to talk.
Absolutely.
Do you think you would find it more difficult to cry in front of a woman than you would a man, necessarily, do you think?
Not really. I think, like,
if she's your woman, if she's your wife, yeah, I don't mind, but if it's a random stranger woman, random girl, I will not do that. It's different,
You find it easier to cry on a random guy than a random woman, do you think?
Nah, like you unless you know them.
It is a real trust thing for a guy, isn't it? It's interesting to think about. It's a real thing. You've got to know your brother. You've got to know your brother to. You've got to feel like you're safely held and in a place where you're not going to be judged by someone to open up for a man. I think that's really interesting. 100%. Fantastic, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Is it okay for men to be vulnerable?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's okay for men to cry. Okay for that to be seen.
Yes, definitely.
That's great to hear. I really like that.
Yeah.
I really like that. What do you think the perception is generally amongst men about that happening? Do you think that's accepted generally on the whole? Do you think it's getting easier?
I think it's probably getting a bit easier than it was. I think so.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic. So the other question we're asking as well is, mental health is at an all-time high in our society. Yeah. Can you think of anything that, in your opinion, might be responsible for that?
It's all sorts. I mean, I was off work for 6 months. I'm on medication as well. Okay. So it's obviously COVID, the state of, the cost of living. It's It's a lot of it with kids.
Worry about nuclear attack and
Yeah, it's just shit.
it's like a big pile of stuff that keeps, every day the media chucks another thing on top of to worry about,
Yes, worry about parents and vulnerable people, and it's just everything. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Listen, mate, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate that. So when I say the words mental health to you, what's the first thing that springs to mind? Struggle. That's a good one.
A lot of different reasons, I think, because not only do people, obviously, mental health is a huge thing, but it's also, there's still a huge struggle around the topic itself, I think. So I think people can have a hard time diagnosing what they have,
even realizing there's an issue in the first place, maybe.
I'm fortunate enough to not have really any mental health issues other than a bit of imposter syndrome here and there and some stuff like this, but
stuff that's quite typical.
Yeah. And having said that, because you said it's quite typical, these things are very typical. Yeah. And I think there's a whole, people can be a lot of, less so nowadays, but it's a touchy subject, so it is. So yeah.
For some people, there's still a massive stigma around it. When we stop them in the street and say, do you want to talk about mental health? Some people are like, and other people are like, yeah, let me in. I'd love to chat, so I find it interesting. The other thing we're exploring as well is it okay for men to be vulnerable? Like, for example, to display emotions openly, like crying?
Yeah, of course it is. Although it's very interesting because, so I've seen in certain places that the amount of respect to which, say, a woman will have for a straight man will decrease, and there have been studies on this, if they see the man cry. And
perception is, no, I know.
But it's perception, and there's so many aspects to it, and yes, I think it's perfectly well for men to be vulnerable, and I think there are bigger questions to. This is a huge, complex topic, but it's very interesting.
It is interesting. Do you think men would be more open to crying in front of a man than they would a woman? Because I think that's an interesting question.
100%.
Yeah. It's almost like it's more of a weakness to cry in front of the opposite sex, isn't it?
Yes. Whereas it's like if I confide in you, right, and you're comforting me as a man, it's like potentially some of those things I'm crying about. It's like I can relate to you more because I am a man. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. The other one we're asking as well is, as mental health is at an all-time high in society, do you think there's anything in particular that's responsible for that, in your opinion?
Multiple things. Social media, 100%. Or I shouldn't say 100%, but yes, it is.
Close to 100.
So, yeah, just about 99.9%. Social media is a huge one, and I think you can talk about the ongoing culture war, whatever that means, but there's a huge amount of tension nowadays, and I believe people have really good intentions, but they really get taken advantage of in different ways, which are really sneaky little ways which they do, and so social media is a big one, and also so I used to live in Canada, lived there for 7 years, and there's definitely, and I'm still learning, because I've only been here for a few years, I'm still learning to what extent this is true in the UK, but in Canada and in North America, there's very much, and you can hear this and you can notice it a lot in the attitudes of people, but it's like, oh, I know the thing, you must listen to me about the thing, whatever form that is. It's like, oh, no, you must do this, or you must do that, or whatever. There's all sorts of stuff. So, and it comes through in people's conversations and how they speak about things, and certain topics more than others, and people have the best of intentions, but things can come off very like, oh, you need to do this. Oh, no, don't listen to what you've heard. Listen to this. Oh, and everyone has an opinion on everything, and everyone has to have an opinion on everything, and there's a whole lot of pressure, about a whole lot of stuff. We can talk about. Sorry, I know I'm going on here for a bit, but
this is great.
There's all sorts of really, really complex societal issues, and I think part of how am I trying to say this? These very complex issues are too often black or white. And there's so much more nuance. There's so much more nuance. This goes for abortion. This goes for trans issues. This goes a huge amount of things. And of course, these are touchy subjects, and people get very defensive about things immediately. And I think polarized, yes, and not only that, but people. This isn't something they should be blamed for, because it's very hard to do, and I try to do this myself. It's like, I don't know everything, and I'm not pretending to know everything, and in fact, I do my best to try and learn as much as I can, and I love talking to people about all different sorts of things, and I think that's the best conduct I can conduct myself in, instead of being immediately polarized, instead of being immediately offensive or defensive. Which is hard, but it's hard to do, because I think a lot of things, social media maybe included, kind of pigeonholes you into being this way or that way, or needing to be offensive, or you're being silent. That's a huge one. And, you
get these like mass formation psychoses kind of happening, where you get a movement of people moving in one way altogether, and if you don't join in with that movement, you're the outsider, and that's dangerous. And that I see as being one of the biggest dangers of social media, for sure.
Yes.
I think what you're talking about in terms of everything else is the way you view things is keeping an open mind. Keeping an open mind and taking in new information, learning all that. And I think actually that's key for being an awakened human being, is having an open mind. Definitely.
Yes, I'm trying my best with, and I think it doesn't help how pessimistic and negative the media is.
I agree.
Which it comes out via social media, but also via kind of old school media, like mainstream media, news, CNN and MSNBC. I'm thinking about American politics here.
Well, I think about the stuff that's going on in the UK at the moment, the recent scandals with the BBC, the big one at the moment with ITV and Philip Schofield and all of that kind of stuff. All of
he was fired, or he left.
Yeah, whichever happened. I'm not going to comment. It's not for me to comment on that. But I think it's interesting looking at the fall of these big social media outlets and people starting to realise that actually all they're portraying is falsity.
Hope so. I really do hope so. But of course, I think in the moment, it's hard to find really good alternatives, and I personally think I've found a couple. Although you need to keep the biggest thing is that a lot of people don't have time to go and look into these issues themselves, and so all they hear about it is this, or maybe they hear the complete opposite somewhere else, and maybe neither of these things are true, and probably, like most things, the answer or the truth lies somewhere in the middle. So
I think as well, for a lot of people don't want to think as well as don't have time to think, they'll take the easy answer because it means they don't have to make an effort with it. And I think there's a lot of people grown up in society, been spoon-fed, had life put on a plate in front of them. They don't have to try. So when it comes to thinking about things, it's almost like, well, I don't have to try if I just choose that answer.
Yeah. Well, I've got a friend, and I talk to him about all sorts of stuff, and societal issues and different things I've learned and different things I'm still working on, in like my own understanding and such. And I remember him telling me, he was like, "Man, I don't focus on any of this stuff. Like, how could you? I just feel like I'd be down all the time." And I personally feel quite empowered to do so, even in the pursuit of some sort of truth, even though it's way complex, way time consuming, and I'm not going to get everything right, And I suppose that comes back to me needing to.
I think that's part.
Be open.
That's part of the process for your own learning and understanding. I think is to go through all of that. You have to go through all that.
Has their own process, and everyone needs to go through it themselves. Because you can spoon feed everyone, but it's not gonna be as true to them if they go and do these things themselves. Or it's like, so I lost someone close to me recently, and before that I had never lost someone close to me. This was coming up on 2 years ago. And before that, you can talk about loss and you can talk about all this sorts of things, and I really didn't know what any of it meant until I went through it myself.
You have to experience it, I think, don't you?
Yes. Yeah.
Like so many other things in life.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you very much for your time today. I've had a great chat with you. Really enjoyed this. So when I say the phrase mental health, what's the first thing that comes into mind for you?
School.
School, yeah. Mental health and school. Okay, that's interesting. Do you want to explain about that a little bit, please?
No. Oh, no, I can, yeah. It's like in school, they want you to like
fuck all, don't they? Do fuck all about it, do they? So like, it's quite serious at the end of the day, I suppose.
The pressures of studying, the pressures of social and everything else, you know what I mean? You've got a lot of pressure on you guys.
There's a lot of homework in at the end of the day, and it's like, can get you down, can't it? So,
especially when it's stuff you don't want to study, right? Yeah, we don't believe in this one-size-fits-all education. We think education should be a little bit different, a little bit more tailored to the individual, so that's interesting.
Fuck the system, innit?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. So what are your opinions on, say, for example, is it okay for men to be vulnerable? Is it okay for boys to cry?
Of course it is, yeah. It's like, it's stereotypical, innit? It's like, hide your feelings, that. Push them down, is that?
Yeah. Do you talk to your mates about your feelings and everything?
You're right, I love them all.
Love your mates over there. Shout out to your mates. Well done, guys. Love it. Love hearing stories like this. It's amazing.
Yeah, you got to have friends, don't you, in this day and age? And when you ain't got friends, like, it's tricky, innit? So just go out there, be confident, and then, like, everything works when you're confident, do you know what I mean? Nothing really bad can happen to you when you just, like, fuck it, do you know what I mean? Like,
so the other thing we're asking as well is there's mental health is at an all-time high in society, and what do you think is responsible for that?
It's probably like feminism.
I think feminism is responsible for that. That's the first one we've had of that. I like that. It's interesting. Yeah,
it's like because suicide's quite high in like men, innit? Because mental health now, so. But the thing is, they worry more about the girls, don't they? It's quite a TikTok stereotype, this, to be fair, don't it? But it's like the girls are a bit more
girls are better at talking about mental health.
Obviously, yeah, and they've got more opportunity to talk, I think, as well. So,
okay, that's an interesting one. Because something we're interested in is exploring the idea of masculinity and getting something going where it's a bit easier for men to talk and a bit more support for the kind of things you're talking about. Yeah. So I find this quite interesting that you're kind of saying all those kind of things. You know what I mean?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just that like girls are like it's easier for them to speak in a sense, isn't it? Whereas a man, it's like quite goes down for generations. You've got to like keep feelings to yourself, innit? Because it's not very masculine to speak out, is it?
But these days in society, I think, especially for your generation, like the younger generation, I'm in my 40s, I think for your generations, it is more accepted to speak, but there's not necessarily the avenues there for you to do that through, you know, and you guys are a lot more awake than we were growing up, you know what I mean? Right, yeah. A lot more awake and a lot more aware of everything that's going on. So, I think you've got a lot more to handle than we did growing up, but you've also got less ways to do it. You know, it's less acceptable in some ways, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting, man. Thank you very much for your comments. Pleasure. Really appreciate it. So when I say the word mental health to you, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
An illness of the mind.
Illness of the mind. That's really, really nicely put, actually. I think that's a really great explanation of it. Yeah. So mental health is on the rise in our society. Is there any one thing that you could think of that might be, in your opinion, responsible for that?
Trauma.
Trauma. You think there's a lot of trauma in society? Yeah, as a counsellor, I'd agree. I'd agree with that. I think trauma is definitely on the rise. Yeah, do you think that's more prevalent in young people these days? Do you think they have more trauma to deal with than we did when we were growing up, for example?
I think so, yeah. I definitely think so, because when we were younger, as children, we were kind of told to, get on with it, I'll give you something to cry about if you're going to cry. Yeah. Whereas these days, with my daughter, I try and talk to her about how she's feeling.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Which wasn't around when I was younger. My mum didn't do it with me. Yeah.
That must have been an interesting education for you as a parent going through that as well. Not having had that as a child and then kind of having that parenting experience.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Fantastic. So the other thing we're exploring as well is vulnerability in men. Is it okay for men to cry?
Yes.
Do you think men should cry more? Do you think that's something we need to encourage? I'm not saying we need to make men cry, but do you know what I mean? Do you think it's something we should be supportive of?
Yes, 100%, yeah.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. When we say mental health, what's the first thing that springs to mind for you?
I don't know. I think it's, for me, it's like it's a individual awareness of your own sort of thoughts and feelings. I don't know, that's like the first thing that comes to mind.
Kind of like your own state of feeling, yeah?
Yeah, being aware of it.
What about yourself, sir? When we say mental health to you, what's the first thing that springs to mind?
Well, I have a history of it myself, yeah. Actually, I've just written a book on it, believe it or not.
Have you really?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, give us a link to that. We'd love to have a look.
Yeah, okay.
Fantastic.
Didn't quite finish, but anyway, that's another story. Having a label bipolar is certainly a task to overcome in our lives. We no doubt draw situations towards us to learn from. Mine was being diagnosed with bipolar about 40 years ago. I refused to go on medication, and I did it through fasting and Buddhist teachings and just generally having a different view than what the doctors were prescribing me. Lithium, a mood controlling drug, as you're probably aware. And instead of that, I decided that I would go without the prescribed medicine. So the doctor or the specialist I went to sent his report to my doctor. When I got to see the report some weeks later, she said, well, the specialist has recommended lithium as an alternative. And I said, I'm not going to be taking any drugs. So anyway, I went back after a month, and she was sat down, and she put her glasses down, put a pen down, and she said, so how are you getting on? I said, well, I'm not taking any drugs, if that's what you mean. And I won't be, because I'm a great believer in energy follows thought. So as we think, so we become. I did go to hell with it, but now I'm in a much better place with it now. And that's the reason behind my writing a book on how I was able to be in control of it, and as opposed to it being in control of me.
That's a fascinating story, and thank you so much for sharing that. That's brilliant. The other question we're asking as well is it okay for men to be vulnerable? Is it okay for guys to cry?
Oh, absolutely. I came out of Waterstones the other day after sharing it with somebody in there, and I had a few tears because it brought back some of the memories. Me writing the book is one thing. I gave it to somebody else in Waterstones who actually works there. I said, because she's into doing editing, and I've been doing it for over 2 years with this book with my ghostwriter, and I suppose I was storing up all the feelings or repressed the emotions. Whereas now I'm prepared to come out to the world, hence I'm here.
Funny enough, before we came out this morning, I had a few tears. I was feeling a bit mixed up this morning. Just had a little release of something that came out of me before, and now I feel great. Now I'm out here chatting to people. It just goes to show, doesn't it? If we're prepared to let something out, then you can do so much better for yourself.
Ultimately, we have to actually externalize it, don't we? In other words, otherwise it becomes just a repeat performance in your head all the time, and you don't move through it. And I hadn't realised that I was still stuck in where I was 40 years ago with my mental health issues. I was quite successful, and I found that, I went to America actually and fell in love with an American girl, and the rest is history. But I had to I was looking for myself in amongst my, I kept on being,
I think we all are.
well, there we are. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I kept on being successful, but I couldn't see the reasoning behind it. What was driving me on? So I was accumulating things, but not being any more richer myself. I think I'm a little bit richer now than I was then.
It certainly sounds like it. It really does sound like it. Wow, what a story! What are your thoughts on men crying? Can I just ask you quickly what you think about that?
I think it's important. I think it's really important. Yeah, it has to be done.
So this is an interesting one we've been asking people as well. So would you feel more comfortable crying in front of a man or a woman? Or does it not bother you?
Yeah, either. The last times I've cried, I think been in front of both at a given point. Yeah, I don't know.
Being someone of a younger...
Felt more comfortable being emotional around women in the past. But I don't know whether that's just because men are less good at talking about that stuff in the first place. Whereas women, I think, have better capacity to do that socially anyway. Yeah.
So I think as well for younger generations, it is more acceptable for men to be emotional. Are you aware of that? Is that something you've come across particularly?
I think so. Like in the last sort of 5 or 10 years, I've noticed it a lot more. Before that, I was very aware that it wasn't really very okay for men to do that. So yeah, I think it's definitely gotten a lot better. Fantastic. Recently.
Thank you very much for your time today, both of you. Really appreciate you giving your time and your thoughts. Do you think it's okay for men to be vulnerable, for men to show their feelings?
Yeah, definitely. They're human like anyone else.
Absolutely. Excuse me. I think women are very, very good at talking about mental health, and men aren't so good. What's your opinion on that?
I think it depends on the person. I think, some macho men probably don't like to share their feelings so much. I think it depends on their makeup, really, for the person. I mean, yeah, I think men are probably more likely to be more quiet than women on it. Females are usually more emotional, but
women tend to have closer knit groups of friends to talk about that kind of thing with, in my experience as well. I think it's getting better for men, but yourself, do you have close friends you talk to when things get difficult for you?
Yeah, I do. You know, I lost a couple of family members within 6 months, so that was quite difficult for 6 months, a year and a half afterwards.
It takes a long time to get over that.
So yeah, I think you just grow to learn with it. It's just a battle you need to go through, to be honest. So yeah.
The other thing we're asking people as well is, what's your opinion on why mental health is so much higher in society at the moment? Can you think of anything that might have caused an increase in adverse mental health in the last year or two?
I think we're a lot more of a softer society, to be honest now. I think there's a lot of people that suffer from mental health and they need help. But I think quite a few people use it as an excuse as well now. So I think
when I was growing up, I remember people talking about auntie with their nerves, but these days you say auntie had anxiety.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. There is maybe more labels available. It's more out there in society.
It's good that it's talked about a lot more now, and people can maybe feel to come out more if they're struggling and ask for help. I think society now is a bit, I'd say, weak. Maybe as well. I was brought up in the 70s, so people, I think a bit more backbone.
A bit more of a sense to get on with it.
Because half the battle is, it's a bit like if someone keeps telling you feel bad, then you feel even worse. Sometimes you need a shoulder to say, come on, get on with it. And sometimes that kicks you out of it. Not to be hard, because there are people that suffer with that.
No, absolutely. It's interesting. We interviewed a bunch of people a couple of weeks ago about anxiety, because that was the theme of the Mental Health Foundation's Awareness Week. And a lot of people said that actually getting off their arse and doing something, having a sense of purpose, was the thing that broke it out for them. So it's interesting that you made that comment.
Yeah, I think it's definitely. I think the more you go and do it, but I think when you're in that mental state, it's really hard to. But you need someone to be hard on you in a supportive way.
Like tough love almost, tough love.
Tough love, because it's so easy to feel sorry for yourself. Now, I think the problem with society nowadays is a lot of social media, like apps and all that, and everyone's worried about themselves so much. No one gave a damn in the 70s, the 80s. They wouldn't give a damn about it. They read some newspaper, but now it's like, maybe it's more in your face. If you say something on social media, they'd be blotted everywhere. Years ago, you see something you make down a pub, that was it. So, exactly. But people need to be a lot more cautious now, and they're stressed about how they're perceived to other people now, and I think that causes anxiety.
There's a lot of imagery out there. How the ideal man should look, a ripped body, how the ideal woman should look, stick thin and big boobs and all that kind of stuff. I think that's kind of what you're talking about. A lot of imagery to look up to.
Yeah, a lot of people get paranoid about themselves, but they get, the problem is there's so much, buy designer clothes, got to look this way, got to have this haircut. When you get older, you realise it doesn't matter. It's a bit like people buying designer clothes. They're just poor people trying to look rich. Don't need to, just be yourself. But I think it's the dynamics of the world in the media and advertising, and the pressure to do well at work, pressure to do well at home, and all that. So it is quite a big topic. I think sometimes it's driven by people's greed and the person trying to live up to expectations they don't need to.
There is like an expectation that you're only doing well if you've got like a shiny German car on the drive and the latest widescreen curved TV, and you know what I mean, all that kind of stuff. I think that's they're like false ideals that people grab hold of almost.
Yeah, absolutely. You live in a society now where if you drive around all this stuff, you might not have it. You're probably in debt, most of them, and the thing is, you're probably worse off. But I think the problem is people just got to start caring about their physical health. If you care about your physical health, it helps with your mental health. And if you are active, you need to really maintain that, because a lot of people I've seen in the past who've struggle with their mental health, because they just sit and wallow, and they need someone, as I said earlier, tough love, get up, get on with it. But it's hard to break that back. The thing is they need to recognise it themselves. And sometimes they don't for ages, and you might have to go on this journey where they don't recognise it, but when they do recognise it, they're more likely to be, like any addiction to something, once you realise you want to help yourself, because people don't want to be in that position, but anxiety is caused by society, I think, a lot of it now,
you're right.
and pressure that it doesn't matter. When you look back, what people say, why was I worried about that? It doesn't matter. As long as your health is the most important thing. Health is wealth, as they say.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your comments.
Right.
I really appreciate that.
All right,
Thanks for your time. Take care. So when I say the words mental health to you, what's the first thing that springs to mind, please?
What's the first thing? Struggling, being alone. When you talk about men's mental health, stigma attached to it that I struggle with it myself, like me. So it's
yeah, me too.
You don't feel as though you can reach out because, as my age, like you mean, you're told that you've got to man up. Grown men don't cry. We don't need help.
I grew up in that as well, mate. Yeah, I'm 47, so I grew up in that kind of era as well.
I'm 50 myself, like me. So it's been hard, like me. I'm just doing a mental health awareness course, actually. So,
fantastic. I'm a therapist and counsellor as well. So,
wicked,
I'm well on board with all that kind of stuff. It's great to hear that you're doing that.
Yeah, so it's just our thing to do, isn't it? I mean, needs more awareness out there for everybody involved, really. I mean,
yeah, that's why we do the podcast. We're trying to raise awareness of mental health. We're trying to break the stigma. We're trying to, we're just trying to educate people and help people who need. And we think there's so much that people can learn from watching conversations like this on YouTube, listening to real people about how they deal with their problems as well. So yeah, I think it's fascinating that you're actually gone down that road, being a man of 50 as well. I think that's fantastic to hear.
It's an art thing. I mean, I have searched out. I don't know if I can plug this, but there's a place called Andy's Man Club.
We know Andy's Man Club. We've got a guy coming on from Andy's Man Club onto the podcast to chat soon as well, actually, yeah. So
I think that's a really good place, like me. It's a safe space where you can just talk in it, like me. Nobody makes judgments about you. But yeah, it is hard, like me. I think, again, it's just that stigma in it that's attached with it.
Yeah.
Where'd you go?
It is. When you've grown up with that, it's really hard to kind of shrug off that idea that it's not okay to talk. Or like the other question we're asking guys today as well is it okay for men to cry?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I bet you didn't grow up like that though, did you? Because I didn't.
No. From a life of being told not to cry, my emotions come out now all the time. Like me, and it's a release, and it's a healing process as well.
Yeah, I had a cry this morning, mate. I'm not gonna lie. I had a cry this morning. I was feeling a bit emotional. Do you know what I mean?
Probably have a cry in a minute. I mean, but it's a healing process, I think. So
yeah, I agree.
It's just the biggest thing you do. I've found like the biggest thing for me was just being able to find someone I could talk to.
Yeah.
Having that, I actually when I first come out with a mental illness and depression and that, I confided in my best mate. And he told me just to man up and get over it. So that stigma attached from your best mate as well, that put me back. I won't tell nobody. If my best mate don't believe me, nobody's going to believe me.
That's the person you trust to hold you, isn't it? That's the person you trust to like be there for you. And if they say, well, just man up and mate, deal with it. What's that do to you inside when you're struggling?
Well, that's it. I just didn't tell nobody else and just dealt with it myself.
Yeah, that's why I think groups like Andy's Man Club are so important. Because if you've got nobody, and there's a lot of men out there who've got nobody, that's somewhere where you can go. You're like Dudes and Dogs are the other charity as well. They do the dog walking with men. That's a great charity. Mental Health Mates Bristol, they're a walking mental health charity. We've got these little pockets of stuff coming up, which is like people coming together to form little communities to help each other. And I think it's so powerful.
Yeah, I think where it took me is it took me to isolation. I couldn't talk to nobody. Then I went down the path of addiction like me for 20 years. And I'm only just not long out of it like myself, like me. So it's hard that it takes you into isolation, doesn't it? That you've got nobody, and we all know where that's going to take us. I've had the suicidal thoughts and everything like me, and I've called crisis teams. It's difficult, man. It's difficult out there. I think, yeah.
Really pleased to hear that you found a group that you can help yourself with, and that you're doing a course to better yourself as well. It's so warming to hear. And thanks so much for giving us your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Wish you all the very best. So, when I say the words mental health to you, what's the first thing that springs to mind, please?
What's the first thing that spreads to? What's the first thing that comes to my mind? I think it alternates. I think it's different for everyone. I think, especially for men, I think that can be seen as a weakness, can be seen as a positive. For me personally, I think it's a positive. After battling through kind of some personal circumstance myself, I found that the more and more that I kept it in, the more and more suppressed I felt, and I didn't feel like I was able to deal with it in a healthy manner. Whereas I think, as soon as I started talking to my mates, started talking to family members, I found that stigma, that there was nothing to be ashamed about. I actually felt that I was able to grow as a person, was able to be, make the best of worst scenarios, bad situations. That's what I would probably say mental health means to me.
That's fantastic. That's a really, really good answer. I'm so pleased to hear that you've conquered something yourself and you've broken that stigma. That's so great. I mean, I think stigma's everything, isn't it? You know, you think mental health and people think it's a dirty word still, and it's really not.
I think especially with men, do you know what I mean? Like, you know, me and my mates would be down the pub. We're the type that, you know, we love a deep, meaningful chat, a little DMC, and every time I was always recognising that every time alcohol was involved, those feelings, those what was going on up here started coming out here, and I was starting to think perhaps I could maybe try and do this without, you know, having a beer in my hands. But then again, I think those kind of places, those surroundings, actually make men feel comfortable, because that's when they're most relaxed. That's when they're able to actually kind of, you know, say to their mate, "How you doing today?" Or, you know, "What's annoyed you?" Or what's giving you the hump.
You're able to be vulnerable with each other, aren't you, almost? Do you know what I mean? It's almost like being able to open up in that way, which is another thing we've been asking people, like, about vulnerability. Like, is it all right for men to cry?
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. I grew up with my mum and my two sisters. Do you know what I mean? I didn't know anything but to show that emotion was valid. Didn't matter whether I was a bloke, what was in between my legs, you know. What mattered was the fact that I had a safe space where I was able to always communicate it. But I think as you get older, you know, you start to hang out with more blokes, in, you know, go to football matches, go to gigs, go to events where, you know, being masculine is something that is pushed on us through advertising, through social media. Do you know what I mean?
Got to be a big, strong man.
Huh?
Got to be a big, strong man.
Yeah, mate. And like, I realised, listen, man, I ain't afraid to cry. You know, afraid to cry in front of anyone. Do you know what I mean? If I'm feeling something, that's real. What's not real is me thinking, "Oh, I'm going to kick myself here. I'm not going to acknowledge how I'm feeling." Is weird. It's weird for me not to talk about it. Do you know what I mean?
That's great to hear coming from a guy. Like, it really is. It's weird not to talk about your feelings. I love that.
It's strange, isn't it? It's so bizarre, because I think, you know, everyone gives a shit about, you know, what other people think. People, as soon as you start not giving a fuck what other people think, you start to enjoy life, mate.
I couldn't agree more, mate. I couldn't agree more. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. So when I say the word mental health, what's the first thing that springs to mind for you, please?
Well, obviously, things such as depression, someone that's been through something traumatic, you know, that's had an impact. You don't always think about some of the other mental health issues, such as, well, learning difficulties, which affect people in their various ways. As a school governor, you become aware of the those that need that extra help in learning and developing. And yeah, it's been actually doing that very recently has opened my eyes in a way I didn't think was possible. Well, you don't know until you start going into some of that. You don't know, but no, it's very much it's an area which covers a lot of things, but it's not always obvious what they are. And people it's very easy for people to say, "Oh, so and so's in the mood," but why? You know, is there something? You know, I mean, you do start to ask,
what kind of mood? What kind of mood?
You know, is it something more underlying in the way that they interact with people? You know, is it interaction? Is it social in a broader sense of the word? And it's opened my eyes. You know, you think children, they annoy you, they run around a lot, makes a lot of noise, but the fact is they don't have the inhibitions that we as adults have, and I think we do seem to see things in very much a structured way from that point of view.
Whereas children are much more about just having experience and learning from basic creativity point of view. I think.
If they don't like something, they show it to you. If they like something, they latch into things, and actually that's actually an indication of sort of personality, which is, in a way, our mental health is very much our personality. Absolutely. How we interact with people. I mean, you came up to me today and asked me I mean, in this area with being approached for various things, there's a natural caution. But this is something that, you know, I can honestly say, having seen people go through various traumas and various things, and it does, we need to take a different look.
Yes,
absolutely. I mean, we need to look at the situation, the things that affect people, rather than the person always, because it can be much broader. It can be some broader trends in society and various things, especially what's been going on over the last 2 or 3 years. Yeah. Lockdown. A lot of people have gone through things which they probably would never expected to have gone through.
I mean, God, I defy anybody to tell me they didn't suffer with anxiety during being locked down. I really do, because I think everybody experienced it then.
Well, the fact is, not only, I mean, I retired more recently, but not only did it affect you in sort of your day-to-day, but you were talking to people online. You lost a key thing, I think, which is perhaps connected to the mental health side of things, is what we're doing now.
Conversation.
I mean, this is why perhaps, honestly, going back to that, there was that reaction.
Yeah, you had that, like,
think, who's this? Why? What? Yeah.
What do you want?
But it's good to it's good to talk, and this is a good example. And I think we just need to we have to learn that again. I think we've had a spell, and again, this will probably affect younger generation, children particularly, because they had barriers on what they could do, and they don't understand it in the way perhaps I'm not saying we understand it, but we've tried to understand it.
I think the education, like you quite rightly said at the start of this conversation, education in mental health has been on the rise, and that's a fantastic thing.
Yeah. As I say, I think we're beginning to realise that it isn't always a simple, if I can use the expression, it's not sort of a simple black and white issue. It's not right, wrong. And there are different ways it affects people, and sometimes an event can trigger something in a person which they're not aware of. And maybe are still not aware of, but they've gone through it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's so nuanced in that way, isn't it? It really is. I think the other thing we're interested in asking to people today as well is it okay for men to cry?
Yes. I mean, I will say that definitely, because having being honest, my mother died as a result from a version of dementia to do with blood clots.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
No, but the fact is, it was difficult enough because I don't know if I've ever really got my head around that, but you lose the person before you actually lose the person.
Yeah, you're right.
And I do. Even now I can feel it in me. The fact is, you lose someone. If you lose someone, you've got to let it out. But the fact is, if you can doing things with like the Alzheimer's Society and things like that, doing walks, it's helped me because I'm actually trying to do something to look into it and why it impacts in that way. And it's a mental health issue broader than the person that's suffering the dementia. It affects everyone and it affects us all. As I say, we lose a person and that person's still with us. And to go in and see that person recognise you is a mammoth thing. When I went in and her face lit up and she used my name, that was a massive step. Other times I could be Joe or John or Bill off the street.
The thing is, you don't know what you're going to get each time you see her, do you? That's the thing,
I say that. I mean, from that point of view, I say that there's something that's had a mental health impact on me because it took me time to get my head around that. And I say that those are the subtleties. We don't know until you're faced with that situation. You don't know about it.
I think that's a very good point to make, actually. Very good point to make. Because we never know what we're going to get in life next, do we?
No. I mean, it comes to us all. It was interesting. My father was with her. Spent much time with her, and they were married for over 60 years. But in those last few months, he couldn't go to the home to see her because he didn't know who he was going to meet. But shall I say, when the time did come, and these things happen, there was a sense of relief because you felt that so you've gone through it. That
feels weird.
We have no idea what she was going through because she didn't realise there was an issue.
Well, no, exactly.
It's one of those tragic things. Yeah. So we're getting into conversation here. I have no problems with it. I mean, I think it's important. Like this, it's important to talk about it. Yeah. And I mean, I have no issue. I've gone to groups and talked with other people about it because I think it's important. It helps me, and hopefully it might help others from that point of view. Because there are no barriers.
No,
we are the gentleman filming us over there, Alan. We are all individuals, and we react to things in a different way. And the three of us could have all faced the same situation I faced, and you could have all reacted very differently to it. But, and I'm sure other people watching this podcast have probably been through something similar, and are now probably analysing how they've reacted.
This is why we do this.
Hopefully that will help.
This is why we do this. We want to have conversations with people that are real, and we want other people to watch them and learn from other people's experiences, to be able to take it in and maybe apply it to themselves and take something away from that. Essentially, what we want to do is help people with their mental health. That's what we're about.
And I think the most important thing is to be honest. If you are working or doing something, yes, it's there's a very much the attitude, oh, get over it. If you kind of, pull yourself together. But the fact is, that isn't the answer. That's just part. Actually, that's possibly part of the problem. The fact is that we have to acknowledge these things, and we have to accept them, and we have to try and get our own heads around them, and acknowledge them that other people are going through different, maybe similar things or different things, but they're going through them. It's affecting them in different ways. I think mental health is something. It's underplayed. It's seen as particular conditions. Yes. When in fact, mental health affects us. Everybody. As I say,
everybody.
The way this conversation started, when you approached me, they were thinking, "Who's this?" Well, we do have those little barriers, those little checks and balances in our life, and we're bound to. Yeah.
And it is about breaking down the stigmas as well, definitely. Yeah, go for it, Al.
So we were on about being honest. In what terms? Honest with ourselves? Honest with everyone?
It is a good question. I think you've got to start being honest with yourself. You've got to realise if there's a situation, a problem, there is a situation, and I have a challenge. I won't use, perhaps problems sounds a very loaded word. Challenge is a challenge. Because you've got to overcome it. You've got to understand it. The challenge is understanding it. Once you understand it, hopefully, and I've got no background in
You don't have to have at all. But you are the expert on yourself, though. You're the expert on you.
When you start to understand yourself and how you feel about something, and going back to the situation I said about my mother with her, you start to think, well, I'm not unusual. I'm a son who's lost his parent. I feel strongly. Why shouldn't I be able to cry? Why shouldn't I be able to feel emotional? Absolutely. Because that's how I feel inside there. Yeah. And with respect, I won't use any more. I would use a stronger language, but in the public. But the fact is that, as you say, it takes all sorts in this world, doesn't it? But crucially, the fact is, it is hard, it is difficult. But the fact is, we've all got to sort of go through it and come through it, and we're going to deal with all the helpful people in the background, Absolutely. You're very helpful. And that's how I am. I mean, there's a lot going on in the world, a lot of issues, but crucially, it's about people. I mean, putting in blunt, what's a topical thing at the moment is what's been going on with a television programme. I won't mention the gentleman's name.
We can talk about that, that's fine. It's in the news, we can talk about it.
But there's a gentleman that had an issue trying to come to terms with his sexuality, his person, something about himself. We can analyse it, and I think it's been over-analysed too much. But the crucial thing is, somebody didn't feel comfortable being honest and being truthful. Why is that? What is the issue there? Is it society? Is it the person? What can we do? Why should we feel? I mean, your sexuality, they are personal to you. If you tell people about them, it's your decision. But why should you be under the spotlight?
I don't understand why your sexuality is under the spotlight if you present a TV show, personally. I mean, I don't think it factors into it in my mind. I couldn't care less who the presenter is sleeping with, male or female or otherwise. I don't mind. As long as it's legal, I don't mind. There's no issue.
Well, that's the thing. If two people are in a loving relationship, and I note the term two people in a love, maybe even three people, they are in a relationship where they care about one another, and they should be free to be themselves.
Absolutely.
I mean, obviously, you raised that simple point, legal, and there are other connotations there, but crucially, where they're adults and able to, they should be able to. Yeah.
I agree. Awesome. Thank you so much for your comments and your time. Really appreciate it. So when I say the word mental health to you, what's the first thing that comes to mind, please?
Just problems that people go through, like stress, etc., like money problems, whatnot. Just things that people can't deal with in general, day-to-day basis.
So kind of like a bit of a struggle almost then.
Yeah.
So the other thing we're interested in as well is it okay for men to be vulnerable? Is it all right for men to cry?
It's all right. Unfortunately, in society, though, it's not seen as it.
That's something you're quite comfortable with, though? You're okay crying in front of your mates?
Not necessarily.
I don't on your own thing. I think that's quite common for a lot of us.
On my own thing, but there's certain people that I can cry around, I'd say. But everyone has that.
No, not everyone has that. I think there's a lot of men in isolation that don't have anybody around them that can help at all.
Yeah, very true, very true.
What would you say to guys like that in that situation? Being a guy who's quite okay with crying himself. What would you say to guys who feel like they can't cry or maybe haven't got anybody to turn to?
I would say just like find better friends.
Find people who care about you.
Yeah, find better friends. No one really most of this world is filled with, for lack of better words, pricks, and they don't really care. And you gotta understand that. So just find your friends, your real ones.
Find people who are real, not people who are false, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Nice one, man. Thank you very much for your time and your comments. So, when I say the words mental health to you, what's the first thing that springs to mind, mate?
The health of the mind.
The health of the mind. That's a really interesting way. Most people put a negative spin on it straight away, but you haven't. I quite like that.
Well, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, most people say like struggle or depression, or they name like a condition like anxiety or bipolar or something, but you've said something different. I like that.
Connotation, yeah, I like to look at things in a positive way.
Yeah. I like that, man. I like that. So, the other thing we're asking people as well is it okay for men to be vulnerable? Is it all right for men to cry?
Yes. I cried yesterday.
Yeah, I cried this morning, so yeah.
Okay, I cried with joy for the first time.
Nice.
Yeah, it was because she did something really cool, which was what was it? I was trying to get her to stay in a room while I leave. Is my room, not any of the other rooms. For some reason, it's pretty weird. She always just starts barking and crying and stuff. But yesterday, for the first time, she didn't. So I was really happy about that.
You're really happy.
Yeah.
Tears of joy. That's
Yeah,
lovely to hear,
tears
man.
of joy. Like, it's crazy. Never happened before.
Okay. Yeah, it was nice that you were able to embrace that, man. I like that. So tears of sadness would be more normal than for you, I guess.
Yeah, I guess for most people, yeah. Even for me, I guess, but I don't really cry too much. Yeah.
I think there's this real stigma, or has been a real stigma in society, not so much now maybe, that it's a weakness for men to cry or to display emotion in that kind of way.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know what comes to mind is an interesting thing that I read one time in a book called Native American Wisdom. And the Native American warriors, they weren't shy to cry. You know, after a war, they'd go to the river and they'd cry to release all the the emotions that are built up during that traumatic experience, which is I think is a pretty cool way to let it out, because otherwise this kind of stress and stuff kind of builds up if you don't have a way to release it, and if you're not actively looking for a way to release it, it's going to come out unintentionally.
Probably in unhealthy ways as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting, man. That's really interesting. So, I think mental health is at an all-time high in modern society. Is there anything that you can think of that, in your opinion, is responsible for that, or has played into that in some way?
Quite a big question, I know.
That is a very big question. Wow. I think the media's got a big influence over a lot of ways that people behave. In regards to emotions, which, when disturbed can cause, mental, let's say stress, which can lead to mental issues. The media gets hold of us through our emotions. A lot of people are addicted to things like soap operas, where there's a lot of intense emotions thrown around, done in a way to appear normal. So people tend to, if you look at the expression monkey see, monkey do, people often behave in ways that they see others behave. So if they're filling their brains with lots of dramatic, emotional material, then that's going to make them quite like that, and not really know how to deal with their emotions because they're looking at fictional characters.
That's quite an unconscious process as well, isn't it? People aren't very often aware that happens even.
Exactly, yeah. So self-awareness is a big part of getting over these things, and don't really get much influence on the self-awareness thing in the mainstream. But we got multiple forms of media these days. If people actually want to look for such material that can help with their mental difficulties, it's out there for them, as well as the professional help.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at what happened in the lockdowns, last couple of years, and people were locked down, there was mass anxiety, and there was very, very little information put out there by the government or the media and for people to manage anxiety, which I just find ludicrous. As a mental health professional, I'm a counsellor and therapist, by the way. So from my point of view, looking at that and looking at what happened, I'm like, I can't believe that there was so little information put out there to say, well, look, guys, we have no choice but to lock you down, but this is how you can help yourself during this period. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It was a pretty crazy time. I was stressing more about all the restrictions than the actual virus.
I think a lot of people were, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I was, to be honest with you, I was going out. I was with a girl at the time. We was going out exploring woods and parks and beaches and stuff like that. Kind of keeping ourselves to ourselves, but without, I don't know, just how do I say it? We was utilising the freedom that we had, and that's a good way to relieve stress, being in natural environments and stuff like that.